Hi, this is Brent with Sample Tools by CR2, and in this video we're going to be looking at modulation using SERUM. Now, this principle applies to any wavetable or any synthesizer for that matter, and we're mainly going to be focusing on using LFOs. So LFOs are low frequency oscillators, and basically we use these to modulate parameters within a synthesizer to create interest and to change variables over time. So I've got an initialized patch here, and I'm just going to make it really simple and keep it as one oscillator, and I'm going to include a filter here. So I've got my sawtooth here, which has some pretty high harmonics, and by using the filter, I can basically cut off some of the really top-end harmonics and filter them out. But what I can do is, if I use an LFO to modulate the cutoff here, I can basically use this LFO to move the cutoff like this, but it does it using the LFO's parameters. Now, you could do the same principles using an envelope, but with an envelope, you don't have as much control in terms of stuff like the rate. So within the LFO section, we can also change this so that we make it triggered by the envelope mode. And then we can take BPM mode off, and now the rate is adjustable, even more refined using a Hertz rate. So we can apply this LFO by simply dragging it to the cutoff, and this is probably one of the most common uses for LFO modulation within a synthesizer, and it sounds like this. So you get the opening and closing of the filter, and we do it really drastically like this, and it sounds really good for chords, for leads, and it creates interest and build over time. So it's something that definitely has to be utilized across the spectrum for bass, leads, chords. It's a really, really fundamental technique when it comes to modulation within sound design. So I'm going to show you another patch which I have here. And this next patch isn't actually using any of the filter cutoffs, and it's not modulating any of the parameters in the oscillator section. But I'm using it to basically use the LFO1 in just its standard shape to modulate the effects, and you can do exactly the same principle of drag and drop your LFO, which is in this modulation bar here, onto the chosen destination in the effects region. So here's the patch beforehand. So I'm trying to make this a little bit more inclusive to sort of deep house. So what I've done is I've applied these effects, and I've applied the LFO mainly to the filter. So this is sort of like SERUM's second filter, if you will. And I've applied it to the cutoff and the resonance, but then I've also applied it to stuff like the reverb and other things within the effects section. So if I turn these on now, you'll hear the drastic change it does to this entire patch. So much more usable for deep house, down-tempo, chill, stuff like that. And we can see the modulation happening. So here we have it happening to this low-pass 18 dB filter and the resonance. And I'm also using it on the drive control of the distortion. Now I could use it again on something like the size control of the reverb for some really unpredictable controls. So if I remove this one and head to LFO2, I can have a separate LFO specifically for the reverb and take control of this into a completely different shape. And then we get that really cool pitching up effect because of the way that I've positioned the LFO on the grid. I'm not letting it go to 100% amplitude. So that'd be cool for sort of single note stuff. If you change the rate, it'll also change the sound of the reverb modulation again. And similarly, if we remove that modulator and we apply it to the mix control, we have a really dead and dry sample, which goes to a really full wet signal. So for this shape, I could maybe change it to a full ramp up, which is really cool. And this would be a good way to reduce conflict within the performance of a track so that your reverb's not constantly getting in the way of the lead, and it comes in toward the end or the decay of a note, a bit like this. So there you go. That's how to use LFOs within SERUM. But again, this applies to anything, any tool that you're using, and it's a really fundamental and great way to add interest to a sound over time.